Let you in on a little secret here. You do not want your prompt to look like this. Might think it looks cool now. Wait until you actually try to set it up. Wait until you actually try to use it and try to dig through your command history. It's all going to be a nightmare. So here are 10 reasons why you don't want your prompt to look like this. Instead, you want it to look more like something like this, something very simple, where I have the host name and the directory. Or maybe I just want the directory alone. That's perfectly fine. Or maybe I want none of that and I just want some sort of indication that I'm sitting at a prompt where I can then type in commands to do things like run a command and see the output and not have a bunch of garbage in my command history. Instead, all I've got right here, that's the command that I ran. There's nothing else there. If I run another command, oh, there's the command and there's the output. Simple, right? All right, so reason number 10. You definitely don't need the date and the time in your prompt. And a couple reasons for that. First off, you can come up to your status bar. You could just ask Siri, hey Siri, what time is it? Or even better, if you're going to be working at the command line here, you can use the date command as I just used a moment ago. And not only can you see the time here, you can also see the date here. You can see the month, the day of the week. You can even see the year and the time zone. You can cram all that information into the output and you won't be overwhelming your prompt here. That's much better than coming over here and trying to cram in 8 or 9 characters to represent the time in your prompt, because why? Who knows? And if for some reason you're like, no, I need to see when I ran each command. Well, if you actually need to do that, typically a terminal has a feature that can support that, like an iTerm Shift Command E here. It'll show you your command history. It'll give you timing information. You can use that instead. So just pop that open. And then when you're done, close it, get it out of the way. Reason number 9, you do not need to see the timing information of every single command, especially given the fact that you're putting that into the prompt that goes along with the next command, and it can be really confusing to correlate the times. Instead, just do something like, I don't know, run the time command and get your timing information. Time and date, for example. There you go. It took 4 milliseconds to run the date command. And because I'm using the time command, I can get a breakdown of other aspects of why exactly that took so long or didn't take so long. Reason number 8, and perhaps most controversial, no, you do not need to see the branch you're working on inside of your prompt. Why? Well, because you could just run the get status command and see exactly what branch you're sitting on here. And you also get nice information about any file modifications, which is kind of like a reason number 8b, and that is that you don't need to show whether or not your repo is dirty, because you could just run the get status command and find all of this out at the same time. And if you're going to do something about a dirty repo, well, here's the details that you need to work with to start cleaning it up. Reason number 6 is a rule of thumb. If you want to know if something should be in your prompt, ask yourself the simple question, if I don't have this information in my prompt, how often would I have to run the corresponding command to be able to figure it out? And if your answer isn't basically all the time, then there's no reason to put that information into your prompt. Instead, just run the command when you need it. Which leads me to reason number 5. Instead of investing time into making your prompt look really cool and cramming a bunch of information into it, instead, perhaps spend some time to make it easier to run the basic contextual commands that you need to figure out information about what exactly you're doing or where exactly you're at. What I mean by that? Well, in the case of get status here, I don't want to type out get status every time. If you can see there, I've got an abbreviation set up in the fish shell here, GST, that expands into get status so I can get that information. Or if I want to see my Docker context, instead of cramming that into my prompt, I can use DXLS to get that information. Or I could run KXLS here to get my Kubernetes context information. So make the commands that you need to run to get the context, make them really easy to run instead of worrying about polluting your prompt. Reason number 4. Even if you're going to put some of this information into your prompt, the last thing you want to do is add a lot of extraneous icons. For example, I know that master is like the default branch that everybody just uses 99% of the time. Nonetheless, if you're going to show it, why do you need to show icons next to it to indicate that that's a Git branch? Everybody knows that. And you don't even need to have the word on here. So you could actually save 5 or 6 characters here by just truncating this nonsense right here and going with something like up above. Same thing on the right here. Don't explain took in 5 seconds. If you need to add that contextual information, that's obvious then that the information is not that important because you're not using it very often. And so you have to have a reminder then what exactly it is. And so the hourglass here is a complete waste of time as well. Same thing. Do you really need to see a clock icon here? And do you need the word at in front of it to figure out that that's the time? No. Go with something as minimal as possible. And that also extends to the divisions between sections here. This is a wasted character right here. Use the color to separate things. Don't add extra characters. Your mind can see the color, can separate the two different elements. It doesn't need some sort of icon in between. And while we're on the subject of icons here, which OS am I sitting on? Well, I don't know. If I'm not certain about that, well, I could just run the uname command and figure that out. How often do you really need to figure out that you're sitting on a Mac versus Ubuntu versus Windows? How often do you even have any uncertainty about that? Reason number 3 is just the amount of time it can take to get this set up. Even if you have a framework or a tool like PowerLevel 10K to get this working for you in Z Shell, is it also going to work when you switch to Fish Shell? What about when you go over to a Windows machine and you're using PowerShell? If you want to try and replicate this between all your environments, you're going to find that is a giant waste of time. But because of the sunken cost fallacy, the amount of time you've put into this, you'll likely feel compelled just to put a little bit more into it to make it work. Reason number 2, just watch this recording here. Notice any problem here? As you're just changing directories, look at all the crap that you have in your command history. Imagine if you had some output that you wanted to review here. It's just a nightmare. And so, of course, then you're stuck trying to find a feature whereby maybe when you submit the command, the prompt goes away and it's replaced by something minimal, so your command history isn't polluted or the output up above isn't polluted. So that's just an extra nightmare on top of a nightmare. And reason number 1, here's a big long list of all the things that people try to include in their prompt. Go through the list and ask yourself the question, is this something that I need to see basically all the time? And if it's not, it's obviously something you don't need then in your prompt. Let's just look at this here. Picking on a few things. Do you really need to see information about your virtual environment? No, you don't. Do you really need to see the battery level? No, of course you could have a command to do that, or just hop up here and take a look at your battery level. How often do you look at that? Do you need to look at it on every single command? Maybe plug in if you do. Do you really need to see your username? And arguably, if you're not SSHing into a lot of machines, you don't really need to see the host name either. In that case, you can see right in the middle here, just show the directory that you're sitting inside of. And don't show the entire path. You don't need the absolute path. You don't even really need a relative path. You just need to show the current directory that you're sitting inside of. Do you need to see your CPU architecture every single time you run a command? Did you forget about it? Or how about disk usage here? What are you trying to clean up some space on your machine and you're just too lazy to run the disk usage command as you remove files? I mean, come on, this is ridiculous. You don't need to see the version of .NET that you're working with. You don't need to see the Python version. Doesn't matter what language or framework you're working with. You do not need to see the version information every single time you run a command. You can just run a command to get that information. Here's an example of how I do that. So I used to put this into my prompt here. So I made a little helper function to do it instead. And that's to give me the information about my Python virtual environment, to give me the name of it, which I could never fit in the prompt, but I would put this icon to indicate that I had an active virtual environment. So I took that out and put it into a function that's VES, easy to run here. And if I change directories here, this function shows me more than I ever had in the prompt. You can see I go up a directory, that's where my virtual environment is. So if you have information you'd like to routinely access, but really not access all that often, build a function to do it. And so what else we got? IP address, that's just ridiculous. What is that going to change all the time? That's the other thing. If something's not going to change very often, then why would you show it? And that's why I think I'm most frustrated by people that put the get branch into their path. The vast majority of people only ever work on a default branch. And even if you switch branches, how often are you switching branches? You can't remember which branch you're working from. CPU load, definitely need to see that on my prompt. See, that's a command where activity monitor is helpful because it updates in real time. Your prompt is never going to do that. All right, I want to do one more here. The last reason why, reason 0. Bless the heart of the person that created this project. Right at the top of it, they basically point out this project has very limited support. No new features are in the works. Most bugs will go unfixed and help requests will be ignored. Bless their heart for being so honest. I think that is fantastic. By the way, I think this is a really cool project. This was not easy to set up. To be able to do this asynchronously to load information and then get it to update in the prompt, that's incredibly cool. In fact, I think that's only really possible in something like Z Shell. I know for a fact that Fish Shell has no async capability that would replicate this. So definitely thumbs up in terms of technical implementation. But I think the hint here at the top of the repository is the person that created this probably knows it's not that helpful to have all this information in your prompt. So they're not going to spend a lot of time maintaining something that you probably don't get that much value out of.